What if I told you that one of the most successful economies in Asia was not built through the power of open democracy, but through a strict and carefully engineered system of discipline, control, and long-term planning? What if I told you that the clean, modern, and impossibly efficient Singapore we know today began not as a prosperous city, but as a struggling island with no natural resources, no standing army, and almost no hope of survival? Imagine a place where crime ruled the streets, where corruption shaped daily life, where unemployment was rising, where the future looked uncertain, and where even the local government doubted whether the state could continue to exist. Now imagine transforming that same place into one of the wealthiest, safest, and most advanced societies in the world in just one generation. This is the story of how Singapore accomplished exactly that. And at the center of this transformation stands one man, Lee Kuan Yew, a leader known for his intelligence, his sharp discipline, his uncompromising methods, and his unusual belief that a nation must sometimes sacrifice a degree of freedom in order to gain stability, prosperity, and long-term security. Some call his system visionary, some call it authoritarian, most call it effective, because the model Lee Kuan Yew created, often described as a soft dictatorship, blended democratic structures with firm, centralized control. It rewarded merit, punished corruption, and demanded results. It shaped citizens into a highly disciplined society and positioned Singapore as a global financial powerhouse. This is not a myth. This is not political propaganda. This is a documented economic miracle built through strategy, pressure, and extraordinary will. Welcome to the hidden economics behind the Singapore miracle. The story of how Lee Kuan Yew built the most efficient semi-authoritarian state in the modern world. The island with no future. How Singapore looked before the miracle. Singapore today feels like a futuristic city that was always meant to succeed. Clean streets, glass towers, world-class education, and one of the most efficient governments on the planet. But in the 1960s, the reality was brutally different. When Lee Kuan Yew took office in 1959, Singapore was not the wealthy city-state we admire today. It was a struggling island of fishermen, factory workers, and overcrowded neighborhoods. Crime was common. Corruption was widespread. The economy was unstable and heavily dependent on foreign trade that Singapore could not control. The streets of the port were filled with cargo laborers earning barely enough to survive. Tens of thousands lived in unsafe wooden houses, packed tightly together. Gangs influenced entire districts, and secret societies operated in the shadows, controlling illegal gambling, protection rackets, and distribution of goods. Singapore also lacked something even more fundamental. It had no natural resources, no oil, no fertile land, no gas, no metals, no minerals, nothing that could support a modern economy. To make matters worse, unemployment was rising. Young people finished school but had nowhere to work. Every statistic painted the same picture. Singapore was a place with no clear future, and the political situation was even more fragile than the economy. In 1963, Singapore briefly joined the Federation of Malaysia. It was supposed to be a long-term partnership that would give both sides stability and shared resources. Instead, ethnic tensions rose, political disagreements escalated, and riots broke out in the streets. Just 2 years later, in 1965, Singapore was expelled from Malaysia. For a moment, the country stood on the edge of collapse, a small island alone, without an army, without allies, and without any guarantee of survival. Lee Kuan Yew later described this moment as one of the darkest days of his life. He knew that Singapore had no path forward unless it reinvented itself completely. The island needed stability, it needed direction, it needed discipline, and it needed results, fast. This was the moment when Lee Kuan Yew made a radical decision. Singapore would not follow the political systems of the Western world. Instead, it would create a new model, a hybrid of democracy, meritocracy, and firm centralized control. A system designed not to please every citizen, but to transform the nation. The birth of a soft dictatorship. Why Lee believed freedom alone could not save Singapore. To understand why Lee Kuan Yew chose his unique path, we have to understand his philosophy. Lee believed that democracy works only when a society is already stable, educated, and disciplined. He argued that young nations, especially those threatened by poverty, corruption, and internal conflict, cannot rely solely on political freedom to survive. He often repeated one idea: freedom is meaningless if your society is collapsing. For Lee, survival came before ideology. He admired Western ideals, but he believed they were built on generations of order and strong institutions, things Singapore did not yet have. So he created a system that balanced public participation with strong executive power. This model had several key pillars. 1. A powerful central government. Lee believed that long-term national planning could not work if every election risked reversing important decisions. So he designed a structure where the ruling party held most of the power, but was still accountable to the people through elections. 2. Strict laws and enforcement. Singapore became known for tough regulations, not because Lee wanted control for its own sake, but because he believed discipline was necessary for development. 3. Meritocracy. Lee rejected political appointments based on loyalty or connections. He demanded that government ministers, civil servants, and even teachers be chosen based on skill, results, and integrity. 4. Zero tolerance for corruption. In a world where many developing nations fell into corrupt political systems, Singapore built one of the cleanest governments on earth. 5. Long-term economic planning. Lee treated Singapore not as a country, but as a company that had to compete globally. Every decision needed to be practical, measurable, and tied to economic outcomes. This combination, democracy plus strict control plus economic logic, allowed Singapore to avoid the chaos that destroyed many other young nations in the 20th century. Some called Lee a dictator, others called him a genius, but nearly everyone agreed on one point: he delivered results that no one else could. The war against corruption. How Singapore became one of the cleanest governments on earth. When Lee Kuan Yew looked at the map of developing nations in the 1960s, he saw a tragic pattern. Countries rich in resources remained poor. Countries with potential remained unstable. And the biggest enemy was not poverty, it was corruption. Lee believed corruption destroys nations from the inside. It weakens trust. It blocks investment. It rewards the wrong people and punishes the talented. No society can grow when money moves through hidden hands. Many Asian countries accepted corruption as a cultural norm. Government jobs were often seen as an opportunity to collect extra income. Lee refused to let this happen in Singapore. He made one simple rule: no one in government is allowed to be corrupt, not even once. To make this rule real, he used 3 strategies. 1. High salaries for public officials. Lee paid government ministers and civil servants well, not to reward them, but to remove the temptation of illegal money. He often said that underpaying officials creates an environment where corruption grows like a disease. 2. Harsh punishments for corruption. Anyone caught taking bribes faced immediate removal and legal action. This included high-ranking officers and people close to the ruling party. No exceptions, no secret deals, no second chances. 3. Total independence of anti-corruption agencies. The Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau, CPIB, reported directly to the Prime Minister. It was allowed to investigate anyone, even ministers, even leaders of major companies. Because of these decisions, Singapore transformed into one of the least corrupt nations in the world. Foreign investors saw something rare in Asia at that time: a government they could trust. And trust is the most powerful currency in the global economy. Building an economy from zero. When a nation has no resources, its people become the resource. Singapore had no oil, gas, metals, or farmland. So Lee Kuan Yew made a bold choice. He decided that Singapore's greatest resource would be its people. This required a complete redesign of the economy. 1. Attracting global corporations. Lee understood that Singapore could not grow alone. It needed foreign companies, foreign investors, and foreign talent. So he created an environment where global businesses felt safe. He built industrial parks. He modernized ports. He improved the airport. He created efficient tax systems. And he offered political stability. Companies from Europe, America, and Japan soon arrived. They opened factories, offices, and research centers They hired Singaporean workers, and they brought new technologies that the country desperately needed. 2. Strict standards for workers. Lee focused on discipline, education, and skills. He demanded punctuality. He demanded quality. He demanded reliability. Workers were trained to compete with the best in the world, not through long speeches or political slogans, but through real programs and real results. 3. Export-driven development. Singapore became a global manufacturing hub. Electronics, chemicals, textiles, ship repair, and later high-tech engineering. The goal was simple: produce goods for the world, not just for the island. 4. A culture of excellence. Lee pushed Singapore to aim higher. He wanted the country to be known not just for cheap labor, but for world-class standards: clean streets, safe neighborhoods, efficient transportation, zero tolerance for disorder. The message to global companies was clear: operate here and everything will work. By the late 1970s, Singapore was no longer a poor island. It was a rising Asian tiger, and the world was beginning to notice. Housing the nation. How Singapore solved one of the hardest problems on earth? In the 1960s, more than two-thirds of Singaporeans lived in overcrowded slums. Many families had no clean water, no electricity, and no proper toilets. Homes were made from wood, metal scraps, and old boards. Fires were common. Diseases spread quickly. Lee Kuan Yew believed that no country could succeed if its people lived in misery. He insisted that every family, rich or poor, deserved a safe, clean, and stable home. So he created one of the most successful housing programs in history. 1. The Housing and Development Board, HDB. The HDB was given full authority to rebuild the entire island. They designed modern apartments. They built new neighborhoods. They added parks, markets, schools, and community centers. 2. Affordable ownership. Lee introduced a national savings system, the CPF, that allowed citizens to buy homes instead of renting them. This created a society where people had real financial stakes in their country. 3. Zero tolerance for slums. Within a decade, Singapore demolished unsafe areas and replaced them with clean, well-planned housing estates. 4. Social stability. Home ownership gave families dignity. It reduced crime. It created harmony between different ethnic groups who lived in the same buildings. By the 1980s, Singapore had one of the highest home ownership rates in the world. Housing was no longer a crisis. It became a symbol of the nation's strength. The survival mindset. A small island surrounded by giants, Singapore had no natural protection. No large army, no deep alliances. Just a tiny nation located between powerful neighbors: Malaysia, Indonesia, China, India, each one larger, each one richer in resources, each one capable of influencing Singapore. Lee Kuan Yew understood the danger. He often said that Singapore had no margin for error. If the country weakened, even for a moment, it could disappear from the map. This mindset shaped every policy. 1. Discipline before democracy. Lee believed that political freedom means nothing without stability. A poor and divided country cannot protect rights. A weak country cannot defend liberty. He wanted order first, growth second, prosperity third, and only then, the luxury of open politics. 2. Long-term planning. Most governments plan for elections. Lee planned for generations. He designed strategies not for 5 years, but for 25 years. He pushed for strict budgeting, strong reserves, and financial discipline. Singapore saved money while other countries borrowed. It invested while others argued. It moved forward while others stepped back. 3. A culture of responsibility. Lee told Singaporeans that success was not guaranteed. He reminded them that failure was possible at any time. This created a unique national attitude, a society always preparing for the future. This mindset, survival above all, became part of the national identity. The soft dictatorship model, not authoritarian, not democratic, something in between. Lee Kuan Yew described his system as guided democracy. Critics called it authoritarian. Supporters called it disciplined. History calls it effective. Singapore was not a dictatorship in the violent sense. There were no purges, no secret police, no mass executions. But it was not a Western-style democracy either. It was something rare, a soft dictatorship built on performance, not fear. Here are the foundations of that model. 1. Strong central authority. Lee believed that fragmented politics could destroy a small nation. He kept the ruling party united. He limited the power of opposition groups that he considered unprepared or irresponsible. This created political stability, a key attraction for foreign investors. 2. Controlled media. Singapore allowed journalism, but the government regulated it carefully. Rumors, misinformation, and sensational reporting were not tolerated. Lee argued that chaos in the media creates chaos in society. 3. Laws that promoted order, strict rules for public behavior, strict rules for speech that could cause division, strict rules for protests, littering, vandalism, and corruption. To many Western critics, these laws looked harsh. To Singaporeans, they looked like security. 4. Meritocracy at the top. The government was not run by wealthy families or political insiders. It was run by the smartest and most capable people Lee could find. He recruited top students. He offered scholarships. He trained future leaders for years. He believed intelligence should run the state, not privilege. 5. Performance as legitimacy. Lee did not ask to be loved. He asked to be judged by results, and the results were visible. The cleanest streets in Asia, one of the world's safest cities, zero corruption, a booming economy, a rising standard of living. For Lee, effectiveness was the true form of freedom, the transformation of a nation, from slums to skyscrapers in one generation. By the late 1980s, Singapore was unrecognizable. The dirty port became a global shipping hub. The slums became modern housing estates. The small manufacturing economy became a high-tech powerhouse. Banks opened international offices. Universities attracted global talent. Investors arrived from every continent. Singapore's GDP grew faster than almost any other country in the region. Living standards rose dramatically. People traveled, studied abroad, and returned with new skills. Lee Kuan Yew's vision became reality, not through luck, not through natural resources, but through discipline, planning, and unbreakable national unity. The final years of Lee Kuan Yew. The man becomes a legend. As Singapore grew wealthier, Lee stepped back from daily governance, but his influence remained powerful. He gave advice to future leaders. He warned about complacency. He reminded the nation that success can disappear faster than it arrived. Even in old age, his mind remained sharp. He spoke with world leaders. He offered guidance on global politics. He wrote books that became international bestsellers. When he died in 2015, millions stood in line to say goodbye. They did not come to honor a perfect leader. They came to honor a man who dedicated his life to building something extraordinary, a nation that should have failed, but succeeded beyond imagination. The moral of the story, the lesson Singapore gives the world today: every country wants prosperity. Every country wants safety. Every country wants stability. But very few are willing to do what Singapore did. Singapore accepted discipline. Singapore accepted sacrifice. Singapore accepted a strong guiding hand. Lee Kuan Yew believed that freedom means nothing without order. He believed that democracy means nothing without unity. He believed that prosperity means nothing without hard work. This philosophy built one of the most successful societies on earth. Singapore's story is not about dictatorship. It is about determination. It is about structure. It is about national responsibility. It is a reminder that nations rise not because of slogans, but because of the choices they make. And Singapore made the hardest choices and the right ones.